Good morning, everybody. All right. So what are we talking about today? Um, well, right now, your next milestone is going to be the presentations that you do next week. And I mean, the notes that I've got here are meant to just give me a guideline on things I need to remember to talk about. But the main goal is to tell you what we expect of next week's presentation. So since the pitch, you've now had us talk last week about character design and how characters, while people just kind of take them for granted that they're just the like this avatar that you play through, but they have a lot of meaning in terms of the amount of thought that was put into them, both mechanically and aesthetically. And that the design of a character is not something to just be like done in afterthought. It's something that you have to actually plan and think ahead, because some of the biggest problems people have is when they lock themselves into like an aesthetic um, picture of a character without thinking about like how the mechanics are going to work or how it's going to tie into your level design. And then we talked about level design, and we said, look, level design is something where, again, people think that it's just easy, right? All you have to do is just put together a level that can work. But the amount of thought that goes into making one of these things, because it's like it's a crafted story almost. That's something where you can't just whip up something like the night before your presentation. Like there has to be this kind of purposeful, informed thought put into it. So all this is going towards the design document. This is probably the only major document that we're asking you to put together. The only other one might be later when it comes to your playtesting report, but that's more just compiling the data that you collected when you got people to playtest your games, with a little bit of analysis to kind of help provide context to the numbers. But this is where you actually have to put together a document that commits you to the path that you're going to take. This is supposed to help be the culmination of all the thought you put in since your pitch, so like since you changed the idea of what your pitch is going to be about, and figured out, okay, like we have now a better sense of what our game is going to be, especially after, say, last Saturday when you started putting together some things that could be the basis of your game. This is where all of that stuff, the game jam last weekend, character design talks, level design, the feedback from your pitch, all that's supposed to come together to actually make something that you feel confident represents your game and something that you can commit to. Okay, so this has a large role in industry, right? Especially if you are making a game for a client. So let's assume you're not part of some studio where you're making your own IP and then you're like publishing your own games. Most of you are going to be, starting off with, working for some of these shops that help make games for other people, like film and media conglomerates, like basically people who are like, they are publishers and they want to make a particular game, so they'll commission you to do it. The design document is supposed to be that agreement between you as the developer and the client, the person who's providing you with money. And the idea is that when you make your design document, you are stipulating in this document all the details of what your design is going to look like, so that first off, your client is going to be able to look at this and imagine every aspect of your game. Secondly, anything that's not in this document, you're not committed to do. So the client is going to be like extremely interested in making sure that every detail is laid out in this document so that it's thorough and covers everything that they want to see in the game. And also from your point of view, it's like a contract to say that if I complete this, then you pay me money, right? And usually it's got associated with each of the milestones, like a particular portion of your overall payment, so that you get a certain amount up front to help fund the team and the development. And then like when you accomplish certain parts, then you get a certain portion of your overall payment. With like the larger part, like about 25% or so saved for the end when you complete and launch the final game. So in this way, yeah, it's supposed to be something where it's got enough detail that you can make it into like the basis of a legal contract to say that this is my game. If I do it, I get paid. Anything that's not in it doesn't need to go in. But as a result, I need to be as thorough as possible about including as much detail about my game here so that it feels like a complete picture of what your game is going to be. The way you can think about it, because you don't have like a client paying you money, except us, and Mark's, is that try to imagine if you had to make your game or specify your game to the level of detail that another team could pick up your design document and reproduce the exact game that you had in your mind, right? So you cannot just hand wave stuff. You can't say like, oh, and we're going to have a mechanic that's going to be challenging and it's going to scale up as people play. Now you have to actually say how you're going to do it, right? This is where you actually have to like pony up the details about your game instead of just kind of pushing that down the path. This is that point where you need to make that statement. You need to say how things are going to work. And so this is what's going to happen when you present things next week. We're going to ask you to, like, you can't possibly go through everything in, excruciating detail, but you have to be able to answer any question that we have so that we understand that you have thought about it, that what you're showing us is kind of like the overview. And, with the hint that, the details are there because the things you present speak to the fact that you know how these details are going to work. And the guests are going to push you on it to say, like, how are you going to do this? What was your plan to making this happen? How exactly were you planning to implement this thing? Right? And you have to be able to answer all those things. So this is the stage you need to be at. You need to know your game like thoroughly by the time you go into your presentation next week, right? And this is kind of based off of some of the ideas behind, this software development document, basically the SDD that you'll find in software engineering, or sorry, the software design document. Is that what it's meant to do? Is it's meant, for a piece of software to say exactly what it looks like and exactly how it works, to be able to, show to potential clients, that you have the blueprint for how this is going to go. And all you need to do is just make it happen. So like a blueprint where all the details are there and there shouldn't be anything that's left to chance or left to be figured out. Everything should be very well specified and, conveying this understanding that you know how this game is going to work. You know what kind of things you're going to need. You know how you're going to put it together, and you know how your team's going to work together to make this. All right. In any kind of software software design document, this is just the typical components you'll find, right? They always, for people who have had to make this, again, anyone who has had a chance to work in industry to be able to actually put one of these things together or inspect one of these, they always compose of the same thing, right? They've got the high level summary, they've got sort of the background on what the problem is, they've got the tools that they need in order to do it, they have the constraints, the development environments that they're going to use, and the definition of different components and what components are going to come together. In this case, we are seeing a lot of similar things, right? You're going to still have the high-level summary of your game. You're going to need to say what the requirements are. You're going to need to say what the constraints are. And as much as possible, depending on the game that you're making, you have to try to define what the game is to us and lead us through it. So basically, we can play your game through your document, right? So this leads us to the document itself. What do we want to see inside it? Always come up with the same thing. Description of your game, description of your team. This should largely be holdovers from what you did for your creative brief, right? They'll change, of course, because after the pitch you've got, or after the pitch feedback you got, and after having new teammates added to your team, your game is obviously going to pivot and change to adapt to what direction you see it going in at this point. But after this, you still need to put in things like, okay, so what is your gameplay description going to be? How is it that people are meant to play your game? What is it that they're supposed to get out of it? What is the feeling you're trying to evoke? Based on that, once you've established what the game is about, then you have to start talking about like how you're going to do it. So the character designs, like, okay, if you want to make a game that invokes a sense of, flow and, weightlessness, what characters have you put together to help embody that principle, right? And like, how do these things fit in? How are they meant to be controlled? And what kind of like movement do you imagine happening, right? Are you going to lessen gravity on these by how much? Are you going to have the controls be really responsive, or is it going to be a slight delay to kind of give it that, that's like almost like you're steering a ship or steering a plane kind of feel, right? These things have to be articulated. The level design, once you have your character and you've understood what the character is meant to do and how it helps the player, do the things they want, the level design is supposed to present them with the environment that they're supposed to explore, either to again create the experience you want or give them the challenges that your game is meant to pose, for the character to overcome. These really have to be thought out, right? That's why Brendan has, the 2-hour section to himself, because we realized he needs that to be able to convey kind of the constraints that he and other level designers work under, so that you appreciate what kind of stuff needs to go into yours. Obviously, your game's not going to be like a wide sweeping epic that his is going to be. Yours is meant to be small, right? Like like a nice sampler, right? That's why we had your first game jam be make the smallest level possible, because we want to ingrain that idea into early. So making small levels is good, but you have to be thoughtful about everything that goes into it so that you're not just putting things together because they look nice, but because everything has a reason for being there. Obviously, because this is a group of tech, art, and music, you have to say how music is a big component, an integral component of your overall design, right? Because yeah, I mean, the other parts are kind of obvious, the art side in terms of the appearance and aesthetics, the tech side in terms of the mechanics. It's easy to sometimes leave that out, but we need to see where the music comes in, and we're going to be asking about that. So definitely don't leave that out. Control flow diagrams and development timeline, we'll talk about a little bit, but basically you need to have a plan. You need to just know that the things that you're aspiring to do are doable, because if they're not, our guests next week are very good at sussing that out. They've been attending the level design feedback for the past several years, so they know when you've overscoped. So they're going to push you on, like, do you have a plan for how this is going to work? This feels like it may be a little bit too much. What are you going to do? What are you going to do if it ends up being too much? What things are you going to cut? And the control flow stuff, well, we'll talk about that later. Just going at these things bit by bit. I should make sure I check the chat. Please toss me anything in the chat if there's something that I'm not catching that you want me to be able to elaborate on more. But hopefully none of these things are shocking or, unexpected. Okay, so your game description. Again, start with your pitch. Modify it based on the feedback you got and any kind of changes you made in response to your new teammates. And then you need to be able to elaborate on a little bit more. So we need to be talking about, things like, what is the general feel that you want the player to get? How are you thinking of making that happen? Things like, what kind of experience is the player going to have? And that involves things like, what kind of controls are they going to use? Not just the physical, but also how are they going to control the character? What kind of things will the character be able to do in order to be able to accomplish this goal? You'll talk at more length about the character design, but this is meant to just say, if we're talking about the game feel, what goes into it? What kind of things have you considered in order to accomplish the sensation you want this game to evoke, right? This is not a bad time to start talking about inspiration. Again, if you can save yourself having to describe something in 10 sentences because you have a game you can refer to instead, that's fine, right? Said, like, I'm going to use the wall crawling mechanic from, the most recent Spider-Man games. Right? It just, okay, that I get, right? I don't have to try to picture how this mechanic is going to work because you're able to crawl up walls that are vertical. And, it's like, there's a mechanic that already exists that I can refer to, show some pictures to help us visualize it. That makes it easier to be able to describe things, right? It's not about doing everything from scratch. Typically after this, you would talk about your team. And this is key because we don't know who's on your team now. I mean, we know because we put the names down, but we don't know what kind of skills your team has. And we need to be able to see how the game you're going to make reflects the skills you've got. Basically, like whatever, it's like, the dish you're planning to cook depends on the ingredients you have, right? So you have to show us the ingredients before we know that the thing you're trying to cook is going to actually come out okay. You don't have to go on this like in too much depth. It's enough to just show like a basic sample or a slice of what skills each person has so that we know where this is going. The major part is trying to tell us what the game is about, because again, this isn't as much about the pitch. It's supposed to be saying, the pitch you'll probably do in like one sentence, and then the rest of your sentences will be, and this is kind of where we're going with it. This general idea has now made itself more specifically into this. They're going to be in this kind of environment. We're going to use these kinds of graphics. We're going to have this kind of control structure. We're going to try to have this kind of feel, and we're going to be doing it by using this kind of character and level design, right? Like specifics, but enough to give people just the general picture before you go deep into any one of these things. One of the big things that you have to point out is what's going to make this thing fun, right? It's not enough that you put together something. It's that you have to have an idea of what fun you're trying to evoke and how this is going to reach that goal. Okay. Then, you start going deep. Like you start illustrating what characters you've got. It's mostly going to be the main character if this is not a first-person perspective. If it is first person and there's no other main characters, then so be it, right? But say you've got a character that is, I don't know, a giant monster that you're trying to keep at bay by constantly looking at it. If that's the case, then you're going to want to say like, okay, well, how is this monster, which is a big part of your game, how is this going to work, right? Are they going to be like an actual monster, like, like a character coming at you? Is it going to be more like, this like ever-encompassing darkness that starts from one corner and, keeps creeping outwards as long as you're not looking that direction? Like, how is the mechanic, how is it going to move? Is it going to move in physical space? Is it going to be able to move through objects? Will it back up when you look at it? That's the detail you need to be able to say so that we can picture this thing and not have to ask questions about how this is meant to go. All right. Sketches are good. Yeah, I mean, 3D models would be better, but basically whatever you can provide gives us more things to be able to give feedback on, right? So if you say, I'm going to have these characters, but you don't show us anything, then we're left to imagine what they're going to be like. And then we don't have the chance to give you feedback that could help you. The more you show us, the more our guests can actually tell you what things are going to work and what's not. And speaking of that, level design. So this is going to be a couple of things. One is going to show level progression. So like I've got 3 different levels and we're going to do this one first and this one and this one. Or my level, my space has 3 different rooms to it. They start off in this room, then they unlock this one, and then they can go between the 2, whatever, right? You basically have to show that you've got this thing and more than just a sketch. Do not do something where you draw a basic, perspective viewpoint on like a napkin and then scan it in, right? It's, yeah, you start off that way, right? That's how people make initial sketches, but then you have to feel like as Bryn was saying, that you've got measurements in place so that you know how tall certain things are if they're meant to be jumped on, and you know how tall things are going to be if they're meant to be walls that they can't scale, right? And you've got that kind of dead zone space that you've incorporated in your design, right? Like it has to be like more specific than just like a sketch drawing that gives us an impression of what's going on. That's where you start. But you really need to have something where like basically as soon as you look at it, some other group could be able to take it and make exactly what you had in mind, not just, have an idea of what you were going to do, right? This is all about saying like, once you get this design document approved, you need to know that, okay, whatever I've got in here is doable and I can do it like right now. Like I could put this level together in like an hour because I've got all the details here. I just need to, match what I make with the details in my blueprint. All right. So yes, and we say this because every year this happens. Every year there's always a group that you can tell they basically have this thing sketched on graph paper, and it's like a quick sketch that shows things from perspective, but it's nothing more than like the sketching out of an idea, but there's no actual detail. There's no specifics about exactly how big this is going to be, where they're going to walk. Like it is really just like putting an idea to paper and then stopping. There's always at least one group that does this. We want to see something like more than just like an impression of what this game level is going to be like. We want to see that you've actually kind of measured things out. You know how tall things are going to be. You know exactly where things are going to be placed. And as much as you can, you try to actually grade something that resembles your level. Okay. Anyway, I have to mention it because every year there's always one. Sometimes it's making the level, but I mean, you'd be surprised, like, there's always so many different levels to making your level, right? Like, even if it's just like the gray boxing, like, you're putting some things together that kind of represent what your level might look like in a rough sketch. But you know what I'm talking about. Or if you don't, you'll see it next week. You'll know when you look up and you're like, oh, that's the person who put their sketch on a napkin and scanned it in and then, put it in their slides. So I'm trying to describe something that once you see it, you'll recognize what I'm talking about. So I'm just saying is, yeah, have a sketch, but then like try to make it such that you've got something that is much more specific, even if you've just kind of got like a perspective view, or you're showing like, like how this level looks from the side and the front to be able to kind of give us the idea of some relative dimensions, right? Like a blueprint, basically. Yep. So I'm just pausing here because I know this is something where, because of what we've seen in the past, we know this is the area where people just kind of fall down a lot. They just don't put much time into it, or they kind of leave it to the end, or they like someone's like, oh yeah, I'll come up with some of the levels. And, when they come back to the group to, get their presentation ready, what they've put together is like, just, it's so bad that you can basically, if you know that someone's putting levels together for your presentation, have them submit those like at least a day before, just because you don't want to be surprised with what you get right before your presentation is supposed to start. That's all I'm saying, right? Just, anyway, moving on from this. So music and sound, again, you have to have some way of saying like exactly what it is that's going into it in terms of what the music is going to be, like the tone, samples if you have, sound design, how those are going to help enhance the feedback that you get from playing the game, what's going to happen when they perform certain actions, what sounds are going to happen when they move, what sounds are going to help indicate when there's a boss coming, right? Like, how are you using these as a way of communicating to the player? Because you don't, like a lot of games leave this out, where it's a huge deal. If you can put it in, it can make a major difference in the way your game feels when people play it. Just think like a movie or TV show that doesn't have, background sounds or anything, right? Like when they show you like DVD extras, when they've, like the deleted scenes, when they haven't put any of the stuff in, it has a different feel when it doesn't have, like this awe-inspiring background music to help enhance the mood, right? Control flow diagrams. So this just helps to articulate some things that are better shown than described. So what is the general level progression going to be, right? You can show what the levels are, but also just have this thing that shows like once they start off, they're going to go to this level, and that'll teach them the skill. Once they master the skill, then they go on to here, and then once they get past this one, they get over here. Or if you've got like a larger map, let's say you've got a house where, again, you've got some large monster that's chasing you while you go and collect things. You want to kind of show what are the different rooms, and how are they connected to each other, and what items are you going to have in each room to a certain degree, but as it shows how the game level progresses. So this is just meant to help articulate a lot of ideas that are just easier to express in diagram form if you're trying to kind of show how a player is supposed to progress through the level, or what kind of options they can provide. The one thing I guess I would ask to avoid here is not just to show a flowchart for the sake of showing a flowchart. There's always, again, one group that would put up a game flowchart that shows like start, play game, pause menu, and then that would be it. And we're like, yeah, no, I mean, that's kind of, I don't want to say obvious, but that's not really meaningful. I mean, the thing that you're telling me is that there's going to be a pause menu. I mean, all you have to say is there's going to be a pause menu, and I kind of infer the rest of that diagram. And that's why people do it, because it's a pretty easy diagram to put together, right? It feels straightforward, and that's why it's easy to make. The things that are harder are the things that you want to be able to articulate ideas that are a little bit trickier, and you don't want to be making something that's so granular that you say like it takes one step forward and makes that part of your diagram. But you have to say, like, if there is some sort of, like areas that are more significant, or things that will happen, then the diagrams are meant to help us see when I move here, like this is what's going to get triggered. So more than just what the levels show, but also kind of within these levels, what kind of actions and events are meant to happen based on like what kind of areas or events you trigger. That's what these are meant to do, right? To try to show you that, or help to communicate that kind of progression or that kind of interaction. So do not show a like play game pause menu kind of thing. There's always one group that does. Please just don't make that your group, right? Only use the flowcharts when there's something meaningful you want to try to communicate. In terms of development timeline, this is again just we know this is going to be highly conjectured because who knows, right? There's lots of things that are going to come up that you can't anticipate, but all you're meant to do here is give a decent stab at it, right? Say, look, I know these are the parts that need to go into this game, and anticipating that things might go wrong, we're going to put together a basic idea of when people are meant to do what things. And this is as much for our benefit, our feeling of confidence in your game or your team's abilities, but also for yourself, right? Like once you present it to us at some psychological level, you know that you're also committing to it yourself. And that commitment helps you make sure that you keep on top of things so that you don't fall behind and miss your playable prototype demo. So anyway, these are just the basic areas that you're meant to cover. In general, the big advice for making one of these things is not to treat this thing like a checklist, just to say, okay, you're going to do the character design stuff, you do level design stuff, you do this, and we're going to separate and come back a day before we're meant to hand this in and we'll be done. You're meant to use this thing as a way of trying to communicate what your game is about. Like there's going to be sort of an overall story to it. And so when you look at this thing, yeah, there's parts that we want to make sure you address, like the characters and the levels, but it's not like these things are little silos that are separate from each other. The whole thing is connected together by like a common thread, which is the overall experience of your game. And so at some level, like somebody, not necessarily the team lead, but the team lead should probably help designate who this will be. Somebody has to be responsible for creating the story. So while other people can contribute to different parts, someone has to kind of stitch together to show how these parts all relate to be able to create a cohesive whole. Right. And so this is one of those things, again, when people submit just individual parts that are just kind of thrown together, you can even see when like the fonts are completely different, so that people are like, it's very much like a bunch of pieces that have been glued together as opposed to sewn together because they fit. Just remember, any kind of document like this, even if you're working in a group and you have this sense of dividing and conquering the tasks, there has to be some person or some attempt to try to keep these as part of a cohesive whole, so that even as you're developing these components, you're talking to each other and making sure you're communicating so that everything aligns with each other. You're not just separating and then just having it converge at the end and then slapping it together inside a Word document. Thinking about your reader as well, like you're trying to explain this to somebody who needs to understand your game. So just remember that, like imagine that you're trying to write an email to your friend to describe what the different characters or levels are like. You need to be able to think about what they don't know in order to help them understand what they need, to get the general gist of your game. Sometimes people write these things like because they're writing it almost to themselves, like with themselves as an audience, knowing already everything that they already know. And so they forget that they're writing this for people who don't already know their game. And while this is something what actually, as soon as I say it, I'm sure everyone feels that it's fairly obvious, but I say it because historically it has not been obvious. And it's only obvious after you hear it said. Okay, so that's basically what the document is meant to be, right? It's just you and your teammates just figuring out every little detail of your game. And this is something you should be doing anyway. But all we're asking is that, for this document, it's just meant to take those discussions and those details and putting it in writing, like partly for your own benefit, so you can go back and refer to the decisions that you made so that you remember what it is that's supposed to go into your game, because you're going to forget as other courses sweep in. So just make sure that you and your team are talking about every single little bit. And then before you forget about this, you write it down. And that's what your design document's meant to do. In terms of your presentation, instead of having like 1 to 2 minutes like you did for your pitch, this time you're going to have more like 5 to 7 minutes, because there's going to be a bunch of things you need to hit. The main thing is just showing stuff. The design document is largely about showing your characters, showing your levels, showing how these things progress. A lot of talking, and people just are like, okay, I'm kind of getting it, but all the words are starting to, I'm starting to get muddy as I'm trying to take in all these words and then translate them into images. Better if you go straight from images into their brains, right? So you show what your characters look like, you show what your level designs look like, you show kind of like the overall progression through the levels, and then you spent a little time, like at the beginning, talking about kind of what it is you're trying to evoke, but you dive as quickly into your actual, like your visual contents as you can, right? There's going to be a point where I'm going to say, okay, you can get into it now, right? Just because I want you, I'm going to try to signal to you that like you've done enough talking, but you need to start showing us stuff. A lot of people are going to do basically, they don't realize it, but they're just making another pitch. Like, so they're like, okay, yeah, we're going to pitch, like, this is what our game's going to be about. It's going to be about have these components, have these things. But again, it's still so high level that it's basically just a glorified pitch that was stretched out to 5 minutes. It's not what we're looking for, right? We need details. You need to show us not like, oh, here's some inspiration for our games, but like, here's what our game might actually look like, and as detailed a sketch as you can give, right? Again, there's always going to be one team that does basically an advanced pitch, and we're going to say that in the presentation. We're going to say your presentation here basically just sounds like an extended pitch, but there's not the detail we're expecting from a design stage. All right. So usually people start off by like introducing themselves, giving like the high level pitch, the 1 minute thing, and then talking a little bit about how the gameplay is going to work in order to create both the mechanics and the aesthetic side. Bringing up some of the characters that are going to help create this this gameplay, this game feel. The level overview so that people get a high level sketch of what kind of levels go into your game, and then breaking down each level in terms of how they look and what they're meant to do and how you're meant to play it. Sound and music to help show how these things are going to be orchestrated to help reinforce the look and feel of your game. How you're going to break down the events according to your team. And then we take some time, about 10 minutes, to get feedback for the things that you've made. All right, so that's why this is meant to take like about 5 to 7 minutes. If you're spending all your time talking about your characters and your levels and not showing us, that's time that you could be getting in feedback to help you figure out what needs to be updated, before you start going into development. And I guess that's the main thing. This session is supposed to be about giving you feedback. So the more that you give us, the more we can give you feedback on, the better your development push is going to be. When you don't provide us with much, if you're giving us basically the high level pitch, then all we can give you is high level feedback, and the feedback you get would be basically what you would have gotten at the pitch stage, right? And it's going to be as useful as that because it won't be able to address some of the specific issues you need. As much as possible, the most specific details you can provide before your presentation next week, the more our feedback will be useful in helping you make a game that's scoped well, that's articulated well, that accounts for the issues that the panel will have, or the panel will see. So as much as you can give us, it gives us more that we can give you in return. So in this case, the other things, keeping things organized is a big deal because you want to be able to locate certain bits of information as quickly as you can. And again, when you're looking at this thing, you want to be able to look back and find the parts that you need to remind yourself, what were we trying to accomplish with this level? You need to be able to look this up as easily as we do. So general to be able to give us the high level overview, but again, you need to provide specifics to be able to say that not only is this level going to help teach them how to use the running jumping mechanic, but here's how it's going to work because we put this thing together that you can't pass unless you've shown you know how to use this skill. And it shows the goal at the other end, so it communicates they need to get over this thing, right? Like the stuff that helps you really realize that you've thought this through, and your levels and characters have a purpose behind them. Pictures, again, showing versus telling, because more time spent talking than if you could just show us a diagram. And every game is different. So because every game is different, there is no one standard way that you're going to be putting things together. Sometimes character designs aren't in your game because you have no characters. You're a first-person game that's in a room with no other characters except for yourself. Sometimes your level is basically just one level because all you're doing is like an endless runner kind of thing. So it's not like you can basically sketch like what a level would look like. So this is a guideline, but it's just meant to help you consider the things that need to go into your game if your game has things like, characters or levels that need to be sketched out. But just think about what your game has and make sure that what you need to show is being shown really well. If we're in person, usually what I like to do is I like to say that to think about this, to help figure out what your levels are going to look like. What I would get, and this is something you should probably do within your group, is that you would come up with level ideas of what an easy, a hard, and a medium level is going to be. As a bit of a spoiler, when you come up with your easy level is not going to actually be the easy level. Everyone puts together an easy level that they think is simple, but really it's actually more like your medium level. You need to make a level, start off making a level that you think is easy, and then remind yourself that this is actually relatively hard, and say, okay, if this is like a medium to hard level, what would an easy level actually look like? And just give yourself the forgiveness of knowing that you're never going to make the easy level first off. You're going to make something that's actually like more medium-ish, and then say, okay, well, knowing that about this exercise, what would the easy level look like? So you basically make those, and then you make a hard level, and then try to use that to say, okay, so this is my idea of how easy and hard these levels can be. What kind of progression am I going to make? And when you share this with the rest of your group, you can compare your easy, medium, hard level. You can see which person really didn't get the idea of what easy means, because even their easy level is going to be like wickedly hard. But then at least you have a chance to discuss and say like, "Ooh, I like that part of your level. Oh, this seems like a neat idea." But you do not take the task of level design and assign it to one person and have them go off. That is a recipe for disaster, because that one person now has way too much power. And if they make a mistake, then everything is going to go belly up. No. This is a group effort. Put together a bunch of levels individually and then share them with your group. Typically, when we do this in person, I actually have you share it with someone else from another group so that they can give you some outside feedback, which would be ideal. But really, I mean, if you manage to do this, that's great. But the final step is supposed to be that you bring these back together with the other members of your group so that you can all kind of look and see what the best and worst of these levels are. And that gives you a sense of what the progression of your game could be as you sample like this person's interesting idea for a level 1 and this person's interesting idea for a level 2. And use that to figure out what your game could be, right? And then you tell one person to take these levels and sketch them out, right? But the ideation stage is not meant to be in one person's hands. It's meant to be amongst everybody. But one person could be responsible for taking, what the group's deciding on and, running with that. Reading blocks of text off the slides. So I'm just reading where this stuff coming from. I have my slides and I know what needs to be said. I just use this as a general sketch to remind myself, what things I need to talk about. But yes, reading from the slides is always something that, well, the slides are meant to give your audience something to look at while you're discussing what they need to know, right? And so you should be able to talk about your game even if you don't have the slides there. They're mostly just so you glance at them and you remind yourself, oh yes, I'm talking about sound and music at this point. And that's when, it triggers the things you need to say. Not that you look at your slides and you read them off for your audience. They can read, right? They need to be able to see this, to have that, that prior in their heads for what they're hearing you say. All right. Oh, reading blocks of text off the slides. Oh, it's just one of those things. It happens. So I'm just like, yeah, don't read just text off the slides. It always happens. Don't do it. So let's say I was making this really small, stupid game. This is a game called Rocket Launcher. All it's doing is it's launching a rocket. It's supposed to reach a planet, and it's supposed to be using the gravity wells of other planets to be able to find its way there. And the purpose of the game is that you're supposed to start off. You can choose to have instructions or not, but then it's very much like an Angry Birds kind of game in that you fire something, you see it crash into one of the planets, you readjust, and you try it again. And you just keep on repeating this thing until you find your way, maneuvering through the gravity wells until you get to the destination planet. So this is just a game that I came up with once as an example for this. So the flowchart here would just be like, what is kind of the gameplay loop, right? So they start off here, but the gameplay loop is down here, where it's like You adjust, you perform the launch. If it works, then great. Otherwise, you can keep replaying it until you finally manage to get exactly the right power and angle to be able to, I guess, navigate or, like move your way from one gravity well to another until you reach your destination. And so in terms of level design, like if this is the gameplay loop, then level design would be something like this, where I would have, like, this would be a two-dimensional perspective. I would show Earth as being the starting point, and then I would have it launch, towards certain planets. And the path it would have to take would have to kind of maneuver its way from one planet to the next to be able to reach your destination. Right, so you can see why this sketch then helps people visualize what I was only trying to talk about back here, right? I mean, this talks about the actions that they can do, but this helps people see like, oh, okay, yep, all right, I see how they can move now through these planets to get to the end. It's nice to have a little sketch to talk about, the number of levels. I'm going to have 10 in total. They're going to start off from one that's basically a straight shot to get to a destination planet, one that's going to have to try to maneuver around one planet to be able to get to the destination. And then, others that have to be, that have multiple planets with different gravity wells that need to be used in conjunction with each other. Just in terms of certain details, I'm going to have to adjust gravity to be able to make it more realistic, because we're trying to make something that helps educate people on like gravity as well as make a fun game. So I'm going to stipulate certain formulas that I'm going to use in order to help regulate gravity. And then say, okay, well, what am I going to do in terms of score? Well, score breakdowns depending on, how close I reach to other planets. Am I going to hit any on the way? How much time does it take for me to get there? Right. This is going to create a composite score that tells me whether the players managed to get 1 or 3 stars. And then, after you've managed to accomplish enough, get enough stars, then it unlocks the next set of levels, very much like Angry Birds. Right. And so this is the idea, right? Like I'm trying to show like what the game is about and have it be in a specific way enough that you can see it and kind of visualize it. It's not just a concept anymore, or I'm showing like, like a mood board or sources of inspiration. I'm actually showing kind of what my game looks like, in some way. And the more I show, the more people can actually say, I like what the background looks like. I think your plans need to be a little bit more detailed, or I would keep them more photorealistic, whereas I keep the background, a little bit more pixelated, whatever, right? That's the more I show, the more I can have people say where I should steer my ship in the future. So that's it. That's the main thing I wanted to try to let you know about with the design. There's going to be questions that come up. Feel free to send them to us, especially when you're trying to figure out how am I going to make this happen, or what kind of format should I use. One thing I should let you know about with the design is that the design document is due at the end of the week. So like end of day Friday, Saturday, I suppose. But what happens is that, well, 2 things happen after that. One, Karthik is going to look over all the design documents. This is like one of the bigger parts of his contract, is to look over the design documents and give you feedback on what things are missing, what things need to be changed, and then he hands it back to you with a mark. The idea is that once he hands it back to you, you are meant to take it and update it. If you update it and send it back to him, he will restore whatever marks he may have taken off for the things that you missed. The idea is that this isn't just an assignment where you hand it in and you walk away and you get a mark and that's it. This is meant to give you like some iterative feedback so that, yeah, you hand it in, we're going to hand it back to you, you fix it, and then you give it back to us. And this goes back as many times as we need to until we feel like your design document is complete. Because once you lock that in, your development process is going to be hugely easier. So that's basically what happens, is that you hand it in at the end of the week. Karthik's going to look over it, get it back to you as quickly as he can, so that you have the time to update it with the details that we're missing in time to be able to start developing. The second thing that happens is that we want to see one of your levels by the end of, wait, what day is today? So we want to see one of your levels by 2 weeks from now. And this isn't just something you hand in on itch, this is something where you actually arrange an appointment with Karthik to show him your level so that he can give you the feedback on what's working, what's not, until you have basically one level that's good. And then you can take that and copy and paste it to be able to make the other levels in your game. But before you get too deep into any one level design or style, we have you give us one of the levels from your design document, show it to us, and we make sure that we do what we can early to fix any problems we see before you start, going too far down one particular direction. So this is what's going to happen, okay? We'll send some of these things out through email as well, but next week, you're doing your design presentations. You hand in the design document that articulates all these aspects of your design by the end of the week. Karthik responds early in the following week with comments and things that he sees as needing updating. You are meant in that week to both create one level for him to be able to give you feedback on to help correct your course if you're going off. And also you submit the revised design document so that you get full marks for having something that is complete and thorough. And then we launch you into reading week, where you can actually start doing your development. You see why we do this? The reasons why we do this is basically to say by the time you get into reading week, that's kind of when you and your team are likely to do a large design push, the large development push. We want to just get in as early as we can before you start doing that push, that large design or development sprint, just to make sure that you are pointed in the right direction. And we have given you whatever we can to help steer your development in the right path before you start investing a lot of time into it. Okay, so that's why the design document exists. That's why we have you submit it by the end of next week, so we can give you feedback in time to do the big development during reading week, and why we want to see one level so that we can basically do a little sanity check before that starts. Okay. This is also why the course is structured so fast, right? The demo video for this weekend. I don't think the demo video is supposed to be for this weekend. It's supposed to be for next. That's what I mean. Like that's supposed to be like the. But let me take a look. I think I might have to do a quick little check just to see that I've got the deadlines pretty right. But I'll send you an email just to help you. Yeah. Oh, the demo for this is supposed to be your proof of concept. Yes, sorry. Your proof of concept video for this week is basically whatever the main mechanism, the main mechanic of your game. Just show us that it actually works, right? So most of you have done this past weekend anyway, right? If like in the case where I keep on using this example, but it's always the first one that comes to mind. If you're staring at the monster to keep it from going at you, like that was already that's the main mechanic behind your game, right? To say, yeah, my whole game is about making sure that this monster stays away every time I look at it. So I need to at least show that that's working. That's what you're meant to submit this weekend. Most of you again have done this on the weekend already, so you just kind of show us with a slight narrative to say like the main mechanic of our game is to make sure that this monster character stays away as long as we're looking at it. And as you can see here, as long as I'm facing it, then it doesn't come towards us. But when I turn away, it pulls a Dr. Watson and it teleports in through the walls towards us. All right. That's it. That's all you're meant to do. Yep. Okay. Well, I've got one more minute left, so I don't know if there's any other questions, but if not, that's basically what we're meant to do for this week. Oops. All right, I'm going to stop sharing. No one needs to see more. I'll just. All right. Oops.